it's good to be with you guys, and consider it a privilege to be able to get up at 5:30 in the morning at 10 below zero and hang out with a bunch of old guys. But I'm usually yeah. John, thanks for bringing down the median age here. But it's good to be here, and Roger gave me the invitation a long time ago. I've been kind of pondering Nehemiah 6 in particular. The whole idea of integrity, as Dave has said so well, integrity kind of means holding together as one. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of finishing. It's just really important that all of us, and I'm 68, just for declaration of where I'm at in my age span, but we do begin to look at life differently when you get older. And it's not just a matter of retirement, but you look back on things and you look at what I call watershed events and how my life went this way and it could have gone that way. I think it's really a fun stage of life. But I think it's really important that old guys finish well, that we don't kind of slide off into oblivion, but we really grasp this season of our life. So for some of you, I'm talking directly to you, to John. I'm talking theoretically to the future. But what we have today, I have two parts to it, and so we're going to be able to make application all across life. But if you have your Bibles with you, I invite you to turn to Nehemiah chapter 6. And it was interesting because I've read through the entire book on a number of occasions just to kind of get the feel and everything. And it's really been a fascinating study for you, and I've been following along as well. But let me read Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 1. Now when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, the Arab, and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall and that there was no breach left in it, and then we have the little, although up to that time I had not set up the doors in the gates. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you're not really done then, because you could have the wall without breach all the way around, but if you have 12 gates going into the city and they don't have their doors set, then you're not quite done. Now, let me show you a picture. This is an artist's rendition of Jerusalem. And so if you go all the way around there, you'll see all kinds of different descriptions, but there are 12 gates in that city. And the next slide here gives you a little bit of a key, and gives you references from chapter 3 when you studied that a few weeks ago. But you realize that Jerusalem was not that big of a city, and there are 12 gates in it. And if you're like me and you've watched these old Viking movies, when they used to go against the walled cities, they could go up against a solid wall, but they usually went for the doors, tried to ram them down. Well, if you don't even have doors there, then the city really isn't very safe. And so the reason why we're looking at the whole idea of finishing is that Nehemiah had done about 95% of the job as far as building, but if he didn't do this last 5%, it wasn't going to mean anything. And so that's why putting these doors was so important. Now, I have a video. I know the NFL finished a couple weeks ago, but I have a video about people that don't finish well in the NFL. Let's see if we can go to that video and watch that for a second, okay?
Yet to miss anything this year. That was blocked. The Bears have it.
Celebrating a little too soon, if you ask me. If he doesn't put up the number one
we
finger.
could watch more of those, but there's 10 minutes of those clips, and just kind of every one of them is hilarious. So if you want to Google NFL, don't celebrate too early, you can watch stuff like that. But I think that illustrates the importance of finishing. And that one guy that just literally, if this is the goal line right here, his foot is right here, and the ball comes out. You didn't see it the first time. Now, the guys that are really sharp are pretty good at that, but I didn't see it. I thought he crossed the plane. But So we have good illustrations from our 21st century pastime of watching football that you can go down 99 yards, but if you don't cross the goal line, there's no points. And so I'm sure there was a lot of humiliation in the locker room the next week for the guys that did that. But now in Nehemiah chapter 6, Nehemiah experienced 3 different diversions, people trying to pull him away from the task. And I want us to go quickly through that just so we can take a look at it. In verse 2, it says that he almost had the wall built. All of the wall was there. All he needed was to have the doors set up. But there are 12 gates, so that's a lot of work. And then verse 2 says, Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, come and let us meet together at this place called Hakapirim on the plain of Ono. But they intended to do me harm. I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work and cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? And they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them in the same manner. There are times, and this is one of those issues that we face a lot in life, and that is we can leave what is most important, but we can do other things and get distracted with them. But he also knew that there was an ulterior motive. There wasn't this idea of come down here and let's just have a little conversation. They were trying to get the big guy away from the job so that they could probably kill him, probably maybe take him prisoner or whatever else. And so there were these distractions that kept coming at him, and he said, I can't come down because I'm doing a great work. The second thing that was a possible diversion comes in verse 5. In the same way, Sanballat, for the 5th time, sent his servant to me with an open letter in his hand. In it was written, it is reported to the nations and Geshem, and it also says that you and the Jews intend to rebel, and that is why you're building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. You have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah, and now the king will hear of these reports. So now come and let us take counsel together. Then, verse 8, I sent to him, saying, no such things as you say have been done, for you're inventing them out of your own mind. Folks, fake news is not new. This is what we call disinformation. Sometimes people can be misinformed, but when there's a deliberate act to tell a lie about your opponent, that's called disinformation. And so this was another distraction where Nehemiah had to send a word out saying, hey, this news that's going around about me setting up to be king, that's all false. Okay, but that was a diversion. It took him away from his task. And then finally, verse 10 through 13. Now when I went into the house of Shemaiah, and then you can see the son of, who was confined to his home, he said, let us meet together in the house of God, within the temple. Let us close the doors of the temple, for they're coming to kill you. It looks like, hey, I'm looking out for you. But then it says, Nehemiah says in verse 11, but I said, should such a man as I run away? And what man such as I could go into the temple and live? I will not go in. Verse 12, I understood and saw that God had not sent him, but he had pronounced the prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. For this purpose he was hired, that I should be afraid and act in this way and sin, and so they could give me a bad name in order to taunt me. Nehemiah had all kinds of things pulling at him in all kinds of directions to keep him from finishing. There was, first of all, the distraction of saying, let's go have a picnic. There was disinformation. and then there was deception. And Nehemiah resisted all of those things so that he could be steadfast on the task of being all about finishing. So, when I think about the finish line, there's two ways that I look at it, and I want you to look there at the bottom of the first page. And here I'm switching now from the Old Testament to the New Testament because I'm using a few Greek words just to help us out here. The word telos is the word that means the end. And so there are times when we can say, if I'm using these cones as my end line, here is the end. And so when I'm here in life, I'm doing well, and then when I cross over, I am dead. Okay? That's the end. So there are times in which I look at the word telos and say, all of us have what we call this last season of life, to retirement and beyond. And so one of the things that I do in my job, I'm not only pastoral care, but I'm also pastor of senior adult ministries. We have this thing called Encore Ministries. And we want you to be able to embrace this last season of your life as the very best season of the life. Okay? But that last season of life can really only be the best season if you plan well. And so for a lot of us, some of our reality is we look at our stock market portfolio and say, how is it doing? And a few years ago, it was going like this. And every time I look at the stock market now, it makes me a little bit sick. And it's more just a matter of up and down, up and down, up and down. And I'm saying, hey, if I'm going to retire and I'm going to be waiting for a little bit of that income to help me along, I'm not sure I'm ready. So therefore, I have to be well prepared, and I'm not good at it. I go to a financial planner, try to have him help me be prepared. That's just one aspect. But there's a couple of other aspects, and probably a much bigger one than the financial security is, what the heck am I going to do? I mean, I have gotten up and gone to work for 40 years or thereabouts, and I had a nameplate, and I had a job description, and I knew what I was going to do, and now all of a sudden I'm retired, and what do I do? I don't know. Now, I'll tell you a few things not to do. My father-in-law, he retired. He worked for Boise Cascade up in International Falls, and when he turned 62, boom, he was done. But he wasn't really sure what to do, so he sat in the kitchen and gave my mother-in-law tips on how she could improve her cooking. Oh. I had the highest regard for him until that. And I'm thinking to myself, she has fed you and kept you for all these years. Now you're going to give her tips of how to be more efficient in the kitchen? So she was just begging him to go out and do something because she didn't want him around the house. Now, there needs to be a purpose, and there needs to be some kind of, I have a reason that I get up and I do things. And so one of my roles as pastor for senior adults is to say, I would love to help you find a spot that gives you purpose and meaning and significance so that you can say, for 40 years I got paid for doing stuff, but now I do things just because I love to do it. And there can be a whole variety of things. So that's part of it. You can cobble together a 3-month thing here, and then you can do some travel, and then you can do this and that. But there is a purpose, and there's kind of a goal. So there is a destination of saying, one day, I know that I'm going to die. I wish that people would actually think about it or talk about it more, but it's amazing how people just say, we don't want to talk about it, because if we talk about it and we actually do some pre-planning, maybe God will call me home sooner than I want to go home. But that's another time. I'll do that another time. But the first thing of saying, how do I finish? If I know that there's a finish line, I don't know the date, I don't know the hour, but I do know that there's a finish line. How am I embracing this time of life to make the most of it? That's the number one way that I think about the finish line. Now, the second way is on the back of the paper, and we use another Greek word, and it's very related to it. You can see how it looks similar. You have telos, and then this is teleos. And this is the word, it's translated 4 different ways in the New Testament. It's translated mature, and that's the way that I use it most often, or complete, or being an adult rather than being a child, and then also the word perfect. And it says in Matthew, "Be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect," and that's this word. But I use the word maturity, and I understand that Pastor Roger, he had my permission, but he used my pentagon to try to help people understand or have a picture of what does a mature Christian look like. And so I need to get that copyrighted so I start getting some money from all this stuff. But I know I didn't develop a pentagon, and I'm not particularly mathematical. If it is equilateral, that does mean that all the sides are the same and all of the angles are 108 degrees. But I didn't do well in math, so I don't worry about that. But each angle for me has a significant part of what does it mean to be complete or mature or to be an adult rather than a childish Christian. So let's take a look at the next slide, and I'll walk through it a little bit. Well, hey, you did it. Thank you. Okay. Biblically literate, theologically grounded, relationally connected, and then on the other side, personally whole, and at the very top, vocationally significant. Those are 5 areas where I say as a pastor, I want guys, I want gals, I want every person that calls themselves a follower of Jesus Christ to think about those 5 areas. And quite honestly, for today, I'm going to kind of zoom by the bottom 2 because I think the church does this the best and most intentionally. But let me talk a little bit about being biblically literate. Being biblically literate means that you know a little bit about what is the theme of the entire book. How does it hold together? We have one section we call the Old Testament. Some people kind of stay away from it because they don't understand it. It's 3/4 of the Bible. Then the 1/4, the New Testament. How do the 2 of them relate to each other? And then I oftentimes ask the question, who's who? Who's the most important people to know? In the Old Testament, I start with 3 people and say, you got to know about Abraham, Moses, and David. Now, there's a whole lot of other people there as well, but about every 500 years, God did something special in the life of Israel. He called Abraham. 500 years later, he gave Moses the law. 500 years later, he called David to be the king and said, I'm going to establish your house forever. There's all of these really important events that you need to know. Then you come to the New Testament. Instead of being spread over 2,000 years, the New Testament basically is about 30 years. It's incredible. It's fascinating. So we should be biblically literate. And then you say, well, how is being biblically literate different than being theologically grounded? Well, theologically grounded means that we Christians have been doing this for 2,000 years. Christianity has existed in countries all around the globe through all kinds of disasters and all kinds of challenges, and Christian people have reflected on how do I be a Christian in this crazy mixed up world. So while we're in the 21st century, I don't ever want to hear you say, it can't get any worse. Because, my friends, it has already been worse than it is right now. And so there are times of ebb and flow. And so theologically grounded means that Christian people have sat down and reflected, guided by the scriptures as their authority, but responding to the challenges of their setting in saying, how do we live and believe and think in this ungodly, broken world? And so I have my little, I call it 2-story house. Some of you are in maybe the Koinonia ABF, and I've kind of drawn up my little 2-story house and built it and explained, here are 10 principles of theology that every Christian really needs to understand to be grounded in our faith. And once you have those, then you can begin to take on the other challenges of life. Those are the first two, and they're very closely related, but relationally connected. If you spend more than 2 minutes with me, I will ask you a question about, tell me about where you grew up. And some of you have grown up a long time ago. But what I think is fascinating is that we, as old guys, are still expressing the shape that we were formed into by our family of origin. But what I mean by that is, I'm 68 years of age. I'm the head of the house, in my house. But when we go to family reunion, it drives my wife nuts because I'm third out of 4. And immediately, when I'm in the presence of my older brother, I take a subservient role. That's just the way it always worked at our house. And what's interesting is that I was lead pastor of a church in Indiana for 14 years. And one of my big questions is, where's everybody else? I don't like being here at the top. And when I came to Brent, and some of my friends said, you're going to be an associate pastor after being a lead pastor for 14 years? And I'm saying, I'm actually looking forward to working with and under the leadership of a lead pastor. So when Roger Thompson and I met, it was like meeting my older brother. And it was just sort of like, hey, Roger, I'm going to be with you just like I've been with Doug all of my life. And I'm going to be your best number 2 you've ever had. But that reflects how I relate to people. Now, if my brother Doug came into this room, and I've said this in his presence, so he knows what I say about him, he would look over the room, he'd kind of scope you guys out, and then while he doesn't even think it consciously, in his subconscious, he's saying, how can I take over? Because he's a leader. And my brother Doug doesn't do well in a number 2 role. He really doesn't. So he is a CEO, or he is a leader of a mission organization, or he's done all kinds of things, but he's always kind of at the leadership role, and that fits him, and that fits his role in our family of origin. And so, a lot of times, there are people that go around life, and they are thinking, things aren't going as well for me right now as I wish. And what they don't realize is that they have stuff from their past that they've never really thought about. They've never really kind of unpacked it, and it's still like a ball and a chain. I'll give you another example. And this is pretty typical. I've talked to both men and women in my office as a pastoral counselor. And a phrase that's sometimes said is, my dad always told me I'm stupid. And after talking for a while, I ask a question. I don't say it right off the bat, but I say, well, was your dad right? And I listen to them, and I oftentimes hear a person that's reflected a lot on life, but they still have this stinking, nagging feeling, my dad told me I'm stupid, so I must be stupid. But I don't think that they are. But a lot of life is trying to prove their dad wrong, or because they feel so stupid, they go around and do stupid things because they just are a self-fulfilling prophecy. My dad said I'm stupid, so I do stupid things. We have to sometimes shake off that stuff from the past so that we are liberated to be the person that God wants us to be. How do we relate to people? And so much of our formation, those first 18 years or so, are some of the most important years of our life. And if we never really think about it, we oftentimes are then carrying this ball and chain with us all through life. And I tell people when I do pre-marriage preparation, I want to know about your family of origin, but then secondly, I say, here's two things that I find, and it's not my research, I read it from somebody else that's smarter than me, but it's sort of like either we repeat our family of origin or we run from it. But either way, it's kind of important for the person that you're going to marry to know, is this going to be a repeat of what I see your old man doing, or are you going to be different? And then sometimes that running, what are you running from? So the relational connectedness is really important. And I'm not a shrink. I don't pretend to be, but I do ask shrink-like questions because we oftentimes don't realize the impact of our family of origin stuff. The other side, so we have relationally connected, personally whole. In this day and age, you and I grew up in an age where I can say this. Oh, this is going to be recorded, so no, I'm not going to say it out loud. But we knew the difference between a boy and a girl. We really did. Now, there were some guys that we called sissies, and there were some girls that we didn't want to wrestle with because they probably would beat us and embarrass us. But we knew the difference between a boy and a girl. This whole idea in the 21st century of identity, it truly confounds me. But on the personally whole side, it's what's happening inside. On the relationally connected, it's how do I relate to people outside, and so that's called interpersonal. And then on this side over here, it's called intra. What's going inside my soul? And quite honestly, friends, there's a lot of times you don't have a clue because I'm not going to tell you. Because what's going on inside of me is really confusing, or sometimes it's sinful, or sometimes it's not very nice. So therefore, I keep it inside. And what happens when you keep bad stuff inside is it gets festering. Kind of gets even worse. So that's why it's really interesting that when a guy will actually finally say out loud to other people to hold him accountable, I have a problem with alcohol. I have a problem with pornography. When you get it out and then take a very small, careful group of guys to help hold you accountable, what's inside can actually become a little bit more whole. But personally whole people, when there's integrity in myself between body and soul, then I'm healthier. But when there's a dissonance or a discontinuity between what's going on in my soul and what's being expressed by my body, then I'm a person that's troubled. And I oftentimes need, again, to talk to somebody to help me get through some of those struggles that I have internally. Sometimes I actually let stuff come out, and people then are surprised. You're a pastor and you just said that? Well, maybe I shouldn't. But, there are times when I would like to kill people. And I've actually thought about efficient ways of doing it. And, you're all laughing, so I guess you wanted to kill some people too. But there are things that sometimes make you so angry, and you don't know what to say or how to respond, and you're just thinking, how could I do this and not get caught? And then you watch Law and Order, and you're going to get caught anyway, so then you decide not to kill somebody. But there are times when stuff is inside, and it's like, you know what? I wish I had somebody I could talk to about that, because really I need to learn how to respond to something when I get so angry that I feel like killing somebody. So that's the relationally connected, and then the personally whole, the outside with relationships with others, the inside of me, and then the vocationally significant. Notice that I underlined the word vocation because I use the old-fashioned meaning for that word. Now, you can think of vocation, and you can think of a lot of synonyms like job, occupation, employment. But the word vocation comes from the Latin word to call. And when we talk about vocation, as a Christian, I'm saying, what is God calling you to do? What is God calling you to be? And in the whole realm of how do I take my faith to work, and that's a huge part of Roger's ministry. How do I take my Christian faith and live it out in the world, in my job, and in my home, and in my neighborhood? That's what is called vocation. And what's really cool is when you get paid for doing something that you really love and are called to do. But there are sometimes people actually work a job to get paid so that then they have time to go do what they really love. And sometimes we call that a hobby or a passion. But what is your calling? And all throughout life, we have to say, am I able to do something that, quite honestly, during ages 25 to 65, I need to get paid. I got to have a livelihood. And then there's, what do I really love to do? And then finally, what's the legacy that I leave behind so that my kids and my grandkids say nice things about me at my funeral? And so all of those things come together and say, what is your calling? Now it's interesting. I've already referenced my father-in-law. A good guy. His name was Elmer Stenberg. When he taught Sunday school for many, many, many years at International Falls Covenant Church, all the kids called him Elmer Fudd, and that was just kind of his nickname around the church. Elmer was a great guy. He was so different than me in some ways. Let's put it in context. He was northern Minnesota, so he was a Union Democrat. He hated Ronald Reagan with a passion. And I am opposite of, I'm the opposite of my father-in-law. And for the first 5 years, we argued politics, and then we decided it was no use. But my father-in-law, Elmer, had worked on the farm. He loved farming, but then farming didn't pay enough money, and so he went to work with the big Boise Cascade paper mill. He loved his job. Anytime a person came through, he would say, you want to take a tour of the paper mill? And he would show us through, and he would take us over to where you beat the pulp into it, and you bleach it, and you do all kinds of things, and you see these machines that make the paper and everything. And he was a machinist. And when things broke down, he got called in. And the boss was looking over his shoulder, breathing. He's saying, I've got 80 guys sitting here doing nothing because the machine stopped. Get it going, Elmer. He worked under a lot of pressure, but he got that machine running again and then started turning out tons and tons and tons of paper. He loved his job, and he did well at it. And I talked to a few people that were management, and they were on the other side of the debate every 3 years when there was a strike and all of that stuff. But they said, we wish we had 12 Elmers. That guy, he comes from the farm, and he knows hard work. He has work ethic, and he does a good job. And he doesn't lollygag, and he doesn't try to do anything to tick us off. He just does his job. We wish we had 12 of those guys. And I so respected my father-in-law because he took that blue-collar job and he helped Boise Cascade make millions and millions and millions of dollars because he did his job well. And he had a legacy that when he died, all of his grandkids were up there talking about what a great guy he was. That was Elmer. He was called to be the very best machinist that Boise Cascade had from 1968 till whenever he retired. A great guy. I respect him. So different than me, but he had a calling, and he did it well. Now, I wish that everybody had that same kind of intensity. Our economy would be doing much better if they had guys like Elmer at all the different posts. But as we look at this, when you talk about being complete, I think of two things, and that is this whole idea of Nehemiah had a wall that was all built, but all he needed was 12 sets of doors. And then once those doors were in place, the job was done. He was almost at the finish line, but not quite. And he needed to finish. And then the second way I look at it is the way that I've just described here in my pentagon, and that is being a complete person, a whole person, being an adult. My mom used to have a saying, I quote her all the time, "There's no fool like an old fool." You know, people look at us and they expect us to be mature. So why don't we play the role and act mature? We should. And be a role model to our grandkids, and to be an encouragement to our adult kids, and to love our in-laws even though they drive us nuts. And try to be able to be that mature person, that complete person, that person that's going to make a difference in the world. So I have questions for you here at the bottom. And my one friend here that's here by himself, you got to go over to that table over there and talk to those guys. But there's two ways you can approach it. You can look at the question here, and for those of you that applies the finish line and retirement and beyond, talk about those two questions. What's my vocational significance in retirement? What do I need to do to set my house in order? And that is, what do I need to do with my life and my planning so that when I die, my kids aren't scrambling saying, what the heck, why didn't Dad take care of this? Why didn't Dad do that? And then if you're in the second part, becoming spiritually mature, think about the angles 3, 4, and 5, being relationally connected, personally whole, or vocationally significant. Which one do I want to learn more about? And then the question is, how can I go about learning more? Where am I going to go to actually get better at those things, to become more mature? Okay? I'm going to stop now. Ready, go. Let me pray for you before I... Lord God, we look at Nehemiah as a role model. And he did finish. Oh, I didn't say that, folks. Verse 15, he finished. 52 days. He finished the wall and the gates, and the city was secure. Lord God, help us to be more and more like a Nehemiah, getting the job done, completing the task, being that mature person that you want us to be. Be our guide and be our strength, not only in this day, but in the days to come, so that we can make choices that honor you. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen.